the rise of King David. Before we begin tonight's journey, let us remember where we left David. He had been anointed by Samuel as the future king of Israel, had served faithfully in Saul's court, had fled from Saul's jealous rage, and had been living among the Philistines to escape the troubled king's pursuit. Now, as we settle into rest, we witness the dawn of David's reign and the establishment of a kingdom that would echo through all of history. Take a deep breath, close your eyes, and let us walk together through the sacred story of David's ascension. The sun hung low over Ziklag when David returned from battle against the Amalekites. His men were weary but victorious, their hearts lighter after rescuing their families from captivity. But as David approached the town, a figure appeared on the horizon, a young man, his clothes torn, dust upon his head in the ancient sign of mourning. The stranger fell to the ground before David, his face pressed into the earth in reverence and exhaustion. David looked upon him with concern and asked where he had come from. The young man lifted his face and spoke words that would change everything. "I have escaped from the camp of Israel." David's heart quickened. "Tell me," he said, his voice steady despite the trembling in his spirit, "what happened? How did the battle go?" The messenger's words tumbled out like stones falling down a hillside. The people had fled from the battle. Many had fallen and died. And then, the words that seemed to stop time itself. "Saul and his son Jonathan are dead." David stood motionless, as still as the ancient olive trees that dotted the Judean hills. Jonathan, his beloved friend, the one who had loved him as his own soul, who had protected him from Saul's spear, who had made covenant with him under the wide desert sky. Gone. "How do you know that Saul and Jonathan are dead?" David asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The young man straightened, perhaps sensing importance in his tale. "I happened to be on Mount Gilboa," he said, "and there was Saul leaning on his spear, with the chariots and riders almost upon him. When he turned and saw me, he called out to me, and I said, 'Here I am.' He asked me, 'Who are you?' And I answered, 'An Amalekite.' Then he begged me, 'Stand over me and kill me, for anguish has seized me, but my life still lingers.' So I stood over him and killed him, because I knew that after he had fallen, he could not survive. And I took the crown that was on his head and the band on his arm, and I have brought them here to my Lord." The young man produced the royal crown and armband, holding them out as proof of his deed, perhaps expecting reward or recognition for bringing these precious symbols to the rightful heir. But David's reaction was not what the messenger anticipated. David grasped his own garments and tore them, and all the men with him did the same. They mourned and wept and fasted until evening for Saul and his son Jonathan, for the army of the Lord, and for the house of Israel, because they had fallen by the sword. As the shadows lengthened, David turned to the young man. "Where are you from?" he asked. "I am the son of an alien, an Amalekite," the man replied. David's eyes filled with a terrible sorrow mixed with righteous anger. "How is it you were not afraid to lift your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed?" he asked. And he called one of his young men and said, "Go strike him down." and so the Amalekite died for his deed. In the gathering dusk, David's voice rose in lament, composing words of such beauty and sorrow that they would be remembered for all generations. Your glory, O Israel, lies slain on your heights, he sang. How the mighty have fallen. Tell it not in Gath, proclaim it not in the streets of Ashkelon, lest the daughters of the Philistines be glad, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised rejoice. His voice carried over the hills as he continued his elegy, teaching it to the men of Judah. Saul and Jonathan, beloved and lovely in life, and in death they were not divided. They were swifter than eagles, they were stronger than lions. How the mighty have fallen in the midst of battle. Jonathan lies slain upon your heights. I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. Very pleasant have you been to me. Your love to me was extraordinary, surpassing the love of women. How the mighty have fallen, and the weapons of war perished. The night settled softly over Ziklag as David's song faded into silence, a tribute to a complicated king and a beloved friend, now both at rest. Time passed, and David sought the Lord's guidance. Shall I go up into any of the cities of Judah? He inquired in prayer. And the answer came clearly. Go up. David asked, Where shall I go? And the Lord said to Hebron. So David went up to Hebron with his 2 wives, Ahinoam and Abigail, and all his men with their households. They settled in the towns around Hebron, and there the men of Judah came and anointed David king over the house of Judah. When David learned that the men of Jabesh-Gilead had buried Saul, he sent messengers to them with words of blessing. May you be blessed by the Lord, he told them, because you showed this loyalty to Saul your Lord and buried him. May the Lord show steadfast love and faithfulness to you, and I too will do good to you because you have done this thing. But the kingdom remained divided. Abner, the commander of Saul's army, had taken Saul's son Ishbosheth across the Jordan to Mahanaim and made him king over Israel. Ishbosheth was 40 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned for 2 years. But the house of Judah followed David. War came between the house of Saul and the house of David, long and wearisome. At the pool of Gibeon, the armies met, and young men engaged in terrible combat. Abner's forces were defeated that day, and among the casualties was Asahel, the swift-footed brother of Joab, who pursued Abner and was struck down. The conflict stretched on, but David grew stronger and stronger, while the house of Saul grew weaker and weaker. Sons were born to David in Hebron: Amnon, Daniel, Absalom, Adonijah, Shephatiah, and Ithream, signs of blessing and continuity for his growing dynasty. While David strengthened his position in Judah, discord arose in the house of Saul. Abner and Ishbosheth quarreled, and in his anger, Abner decided to turn the kingdom over to David. He sent messengers to David, saying, To whom does the land belong? Make your covenant with me, and behold, my hand shall be with you to bring over all Israel to you. David agreed with one condition, that Michal, Saul's daughter and David's first wife, be returned to him. And so it was done, though Michal's second husband followed her weeping as she was taken away. Abner spoke with the elders of Israel, reminding them of their desire for David to be king. The Lord has promised David, he told them, saying, "By the hand of my servant David I will save my people Israel from the hand of the Philistines and from the hand of all their enemies." Then Abner went to Hebron to speak with David, and they made a covenant together. But tragedy struck swiftly. Joab, David's commander who had been away on a raid, returned and learned that Abner had visited David and been sent away in peace. Enraged, whether from lingering vengeance for his brother Asahel or from political jealousy, Joab sent messengers to bring Abner back. When Abner returned, Joab took him aside in the gate, as if to speak with him privately, and there he struck him in the stomach, and Abner died for the blood of Asahel. When David heard of it, he declared, "I and my kingdom are forever innocent before the Lord for the blood of Abner." He commanded Joab and all the people with him to mourn Abner, and David himself followed the bier, weeping at the grave. He fasted until evening and composed another lament. "Should Abner die as a fool dies? Your hands were not bound, your feet were not fettered. As one falls before the wicked, you have fallen." The people understood that David had no part in Abner's death, and his grief was genuine. Not long after, 2 men from Ishbosheth's own army, Rechab and Baanah, crept into their king's house at noon while he rested and struck him down. They brought his head to David at Hebron, thinking to please him. But David's response echoed his earlier judgment of the Amalekite. "As the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life out of every adversity, when one told me, 'Behold, Saul is dead,' and thought he was bringing good news, I seized him and killed him at Ziklag. How much more, when wicked men have killed a righteous man in his own house on his bed, shall I not now require his blood at your hand?" David commanded his young men, and they killed Rechab and Baanah, cutting off their hands and feet and hanging their bodies beside the pool at Hebron. But they took the head of Ishbosheth and buried it in the tomb of Abner at Hebron, giving him the dignity his assassins had sought to deny. With the house of Saul no more, all the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron. "Behold," they said, "we are your bone and flesh. In times past when Saul was king over us, it was you who led out and brought in Israel. And the Lord said to you, 'You shall be shepherd of my people Israel, and you shall be prince over Israel.'" The elders made a covenant with David before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. He was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he would reign for 40 years, 7 years in Hebron over Judah, and 33 years in Jerusalem over all Israel and Judah. David set his eyes on a prize that had long eluded Israel, Jerusalem, the stronghold of the Jebusites. The defenders were confident, taunting David, "You will not come in here, but the blind and the lame will ward you off." But David and his men found the water shaft and entered the city, capturing the fortress of Zion. David made his home there and called it the City of David. He built up the area around it from the terraces inward, and he became greater and greater, for the Lord, the God of hosts, was with him. King Hiram of Tyre sent messengers to David, along with cedar trees, carpenters, and masons, and they built David a palace. And David knew that the Lord had established him as king over Israel, and had exalted his kingdom for the sake of his people. With the kingdom established, David's heart turned to the most sacred object in all of Israel, the Ark of God, which had remained at Kiriath Jearim since the days of its return from the Philistines. David gathered 30,000 chosen men of Israel and went to bring up the ark, the symbol of God's presence among his people. They placed the ark on a new cart with Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, guiding it. David and all the house of Israel celebrated before the Lord with all their might, with songs and lyres and harps and tambourines and castanets and cymbals. But when they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, the oxen stumbled, and Uzzah reached out his hand to steady the ark. The Lord's anger was kindled against Uzzah, and God struck him down there beside the ark, and he died. David was both angry and afraid, and he left the ark at the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite for 3 months. The Lord blessed Obed-Edom and all his household because of the ark. When David heard of this blessing, his courage returned. He went and brought up the ark from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with rejoicing. After those bearing the ark had gone 6 steps, David sacrificed an ox and a fattened animal. And David danced before the Lord with all his might, wearing a linen ephod, while he and all Israel brought up the ark with shouting and the sound of the trumpet. As the ark entered the city of David, Michal, Saul's daughter, looked out the window and saw King David leaping and dancing, and she despised him in her heart. They brought in the ark and set it in its place inside the tent that David had pitched for it. And David offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. He blessed the people in the name of the Lord and distributed food to everyone, a loaf of bread, a portion of meat, and a cake of raisins to each person in the whole multitude of Israel, both men and women. David dwelt in his house of cedar, and one evening he said to Nathan the prophet, "See now, I dwell in a house of cedar, but the ark of God dwells in a tent." Nathan initially encouraged him, "Go do all that is in your heart, for the Lord is with you." But that night, the word of the Lord came to Nathan with a different message. God reminded David that he had never asked for a house, that he had been with David wherever he went, and that he had cut off all his enemies. Then came a stunning promise. The Lord declares to you that the Lord will make you a house. When your days are fulfilled and you lie down with your fathers, I will raise up your offspring after you, who shall come from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. David went in and sat before the Lord, overwhelmed by this promise. "Who am I, O Lord God?" he prayed, "and what is my house, that you have brought me thus far? And yet this was a small thing in your eyes, O Lord God. You have spoken also of your servant's house for a great while to come." He praised God for his steadfast love and faithfulness, and he accepted that his son, not he himself, would build the temple. The Lord gave David victory wherever he went. He defeated the Philistines and subdued them. He struck down Moab and measured them with a line, making them tributaries. He fought against Hadadezer, king of Zobah, and captured his chariots and horsemen. He hamstrung all the chariot horses, keeping only enough for 100 chariots. When the Syrians of Damascus came to help Hadadezer, David struck down 22,000 of them and put garrisons in Syria, so that the Syrians became servants to David and brought tribute. Shields of gold that belonged to the servants of Hadadezer were brought to Jerusalem, along with bronze from the cities he had conquered. King Toi of Hamath, hearing that David had defeated Hadadezer, sent his son with articles of silver, gold, and bronze to greet David and bless him. David dedicated all these treasures to the Lord, along with the silver and gold from all the nations he had subdued, from Edom and Moab, from the Ammonites and Philistines, from Amalek, and from Hadadezer. David won a name for himself when he returned from striking down 18,000 Edomites in the Valley of Salt. He put garrisons throughout Edom, and all the Edomites became David's servants. So David reigned over all Israel, and he administered justice and equity to all his people. Joab was over the army, Jehoshaphat was recorder, Zadok and Ahimelech were priests, Sariah was secretary, and Benaiah commanded the special forces. David's sons were priests, each serving in the administration of the growing kingdom. The Lord was with David wherever he went. And so as we prepare to rest tonight, we reflect on David's journey from shepherd boy to king, from fugitive to the establisher of a dynasty that would last for generations. We have witnessed his sorrow at the death of friends and enemies alike, his refusal to seize power through violence, his patience in waiting for God's timing. We have seen him dance with abandon before the ark, showing us that worship need not be dignified when the heart is truly grateful. We have heard God's promise that David's throne would be established forever, a promise that would reach far beyond David himself, pointing toward a greater king to come, one who would also be born in Bethlehem, one who would also be called the Son of David. David was not perfect. His story is not yet finished, and trials still await him. But tonight, we rest in this moment of triumph and blessing, when a shepherd became a king, when a kingdom was united, and when the Ark of God came home at last to dwell among the people. Let David's patience remind us that God's timing is perfect. Let his worship inspire our own hearts to gratitude. Let his justice encourage us to seek fairness and equity in our own lives. And let God's promise to David remind us that the Lord keeps his word across generations, across centuries, across all of time. Rest now in the knowledge that the same God who was with David wherever he went is with you tonight. The same God who brought the shepherd boy to the throne watches over you as you sleep. The same God who promised an everlasting kingdom holds your tomorrow in his hands. Peace be with you as you close your eyes. May your rest be deep and your dreams be gentle, and may you wake with a heart ready to worship as David did, with all your might. Good night, fellow traveler.